She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a storm in heels. And when she leaned across the desk and said, "You're in trouble, unless you obey me," I realized this was no ordinary case, it was the beginning of something I couldn't walk away from. I still remember the first time I walked into her office. It wasn't just a room, it was an atmosphere, carefully crafted to make a man feel both small and watched. Heavy curtains muted the afternoon light, leaving the tall bookshelves and polished wooden desk half-bathed in shadows. The smell of leather-bound case files and faint perfume clung to the air. My steps echoed on the marble floor, louder than I wanted them to. I was 26, carrying more mistakes than answers, and I had been told that only she could help me. She didn't rise when I entered. Instead, she sat poised behind her desk, one leg crossed neatly over the other, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her. A 42-year-old woman with a reputation for being unshakable, precise, and merciless in court. Her presence carried the kind of authority you don't argue with, you feel it, the way you feel a storm brewing long before the rain starts to fall. When she finally looked up, her gaze landed on me like a verdict. Calm, sharp, assessing. Her voice was low, steady, carrying a weight that silenced every thought in my head. "You're in trouble," she said without preamble, sliding a folder toward me. "And unless you obey me, you won't get out of it." My throat went dry. I tried to answer, but my words stumbled. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way a chess player studies the board before making her move. There was no warmth in her tone, but there was something else, something deliberate, almost personal, in the way she held my attention. I sat down across from her, hands clasped tightly to keep from fidgeting. She tapped her pen against the desk, the rhythmic sound amplifying the silence between us. Every detail of her presence unnerved me, the way her tailored suit seemed too perfect for the hour, the calm curve of her lips when she noticed my unease, the steady confidence in every gesture. I should have been thinking about the case, about the mess I was in. Instead, I was distracted by her. By the way authority draped over her like a second skin, by the quiet elegance of a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. That day, I walked into her office looking for help. But when I left, I carried something I hadn't expected, an unshakable awareness that this woman, this lawyer, was about to change everything I thought I knew about power, and about myself. The next time I sat across from her, the air between us felt heavier. She had spread a neat stack of documents across her desk, each one marked with her sharp handwriting, precise and deliberate. She didn't waste time on small talk. Read, sign, and follow every instruction. Exactly. If you stray even once, I won't be able to protect you. Her voice was like steel wrapped in velvet, firm, but impossibly steady. I nodded quickly, but the truth was I hadn't even processed half of what she'd said. My mind was too busy trying to navigate the conflicting waves she stirred inside me. Fear of what might happen if I didn't listen. Curiosity about why her words carried more than just professional command. And something else, an attraction that unsettled me more than the case itself. I reached for the papers, my hand brushing against hers as I slid them closer. It should have been nothing, an accidental touch, but it didn't feel like nothing. Her hand lingered a second too long before she withdrew, her expression unchanged, though her eyes betrayed the faintest flicker, something unreadable, something intentional. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as if testing me. "You don't like being told what to do, do you?" she asked, her tone cool, almost amused. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't, usually." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips, the kind of smile that knows more than it reveals. "Then this will be good practice for you." The words struck me harder than they should have. It wasn't just about legal instructions. It felt like something else, like she was measuring me, pushing to see if I would resist or submit. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't a child to be scolded. But the truth was, I needed her. I needed the way she commanded the situation when I felt powerless. So I swallowed my pride and nodded again. "Tell me what to do." She uncapped her pen, handed it to me, and watched as I began signing the papers. Her gaze never left me, steady and unblinking. It was unnerving, but strangely grounding, like she was pulling me into her world, one decision at a time. By the time I finished, I realized something had shifted. I had obeyed her, reluctantly at first, but completely. And though I didn't want to admit it, a part of me wondered if I would do it again, not out of fear, but because of the way it felt to follow her lead. It was close to midnight when I found myself back in her office. The city outside was quiet, a soft rain falling against the tall windows, blurring the lights into streaks of gold. Inside, only the desk lamp glowed, casting warm shadows across the polished wood. She was still there, seated in her high-backed chair, but this time she looked different. Her blazer was draped across the armrest, her hair slightly undone, and the sharp glasses she usually wore lay folded beside the files. For the first time, she didn't look untouchable. She looked human. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, watching her rub her temples with tired fingers. Her composure, so flawless during the day, had slipped, just enough to show the weight she carried. When she finally noticed me, her eyes softened for a fraction of a second before she straightened, as if snapping the armor back into place. "You're still here?" she asked quietly. Her voice was lower than usual, without the courtroom edge. "I thought you might need help," I said, and the word surprised me. I wasn't sure if I meant help with the case, or with something else entirely. She let out a faint laugh, though it wasn't really laughter, it was the sound of someone who hadn't let herself breathe in hours. She leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. "I can't fight every battle alone." That confession hung in the air, delicate and dangerous. For a woman like her, admitting weakness felt like an act of rebellion against her own nature. And for me, it was a glimpse beneath the surface I hadn't expected to see. I walked closer, my footsteps soft against the carpet. She opened her eyes, watching me carefully, as if measuring how much of herself she had just revealed. The lamplight touched the tired lines around her eyes, the small tremor in her hands before she steadied them on the desk. Without thinking, I reached for one of the files and placed it back into the pile. "You don't have to," I said softly. Her lips pressed together, and for once she didn't argue. She let the silence stretch, her gaze lingering on me with an intensity that wasn't about the case anymore. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement that for the first time, someone was willing to see her not as the unshakable lawyer, but as the woman behind it all. And in that quiet, rain-soaked moment, I realized how dangerous it felt, not because she was powerful, but because I was beginning to care. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air in her office still felt heavy, thick with the silence of things unsaid. We stood side by side at her long oak desk, reviewing pages of evidence spread between us. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the file while mine hovered close, and though there was enough space to breathe, it felt as if we were standing too close, caught in some invisible pull neither of us wanted to acknowledge. She spoke in her usual precise tone, explaining the strategy for the case, but I barely heard the words. What I noticed instead was the way her sleeve brushed against my arm each time she reached for another document. The warmth of her presence, subtle and constant, had become impossible to ignore. At one point, a strand of her hair slipped loose, falling forward across her cheek as she bent to underline a passage. My instinct moved faster than thought. I reached out, brushing it gently back behind her ear. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to still. Her pen froze mid-sentence, her eyes flicking to mine. It should have been a simple gesture, polite, even. But the look that passed between us lingered, heavy with meaning. Her eyes held mine longer than she intended, as though she was daring me to recognize what neither of us would say aloud. I swallowed, my pulse quickening, and forced my gaze back to the file. But the moment had already carved itself into me. I could feel her presence more sharply now, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from where her arm brushed mine again, the deliberate calm in her movements that now felt like restraint. She cleared her throat softly, regaining her composure. "Focus," she said, though her voice lacked its usual firmness. It was quieter, almost strained. I nodded, but my thoughts betrayed me. Every part of me wanted to lean into the silence, to test what would happen if I didn't obey this time. But I didn't. Not yet. The tension hung between us like the thin line of a blade, fragile, sharp, and capable of cutting everything we had built if either of us pressed too hard. So we worked in silence, our shoulders nearly touching, our hands brushing occasionally, each accidental contact sparking like a match in the dark. And though not a single word of it was spoken, I knew she felt it too. Because sometimes, attraction doesn't announce itself with confessions or declarations. Sometimes, it whispers in the spaces where silence lasts too long, and a single touch says more than an entire conversation ever could. The courthouse always carried a weight of its own. Its marble corridors echoed with footsteps, whispers, and the rustle of papers, every sound amplified under the high ceilings. Walking beside her through those halls was like stepping into a spotlight I never asked for. She moved with the same composure as always, heels clicking steadily against the floor, chin lifted, every inch the woman in control. But I felt the stares. And I heard the whispers. It started as a murmur behind us, two voices, low but sharp enough to pierce through the air. "That's him," one said, followed by a quiet laugh. The boy under her spell. I clenched my jaw, my steps faltering for a moment. My instinct was to turn around, to defend myself, to prove I wasn't some naive kid being led by the hand of a woman twice my strength. But when I glanced at her, she didn't flinch. She didn't slow. She kept walking as if the world around her was made of glass and she refused to let it touch her. And that hurt more than the words themselves, because I realized she had heard them too. Her shoulders had stiffened, just slightly, her posture a little too rigid. She didn't meet my eyes, didn't break stride, didn't acknowledge the insult. That was her way, silence was her armor. But I felt the sting of it all the same. The judgment wasn't just about me, it was about her. About what people thought a woman like her should or shouldn't want, who she should or shouldn't be seen with. When we finally reached her office, the heavy door closed behind us, cutting off the courthouse noise. For a moment, the silence between us was unbearable. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. She set her files down with more force than usual, the papers sliding crooked across the desk. "Ignore them," she said finally, her voice sharper than it needed to be. I tried to nod, but the anger pressed hard against my chest. "They think I'm weak. That I don't know what I'm doing with you." Her eyes snapped to mine, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she crossed her arms, her composure returning like a shield sliding back into place. "Let them think what they want. It changes nothing. But it did change something. Not the case. Not her work. But us." I wanted to believe her, to accept her calm dismissal as truth. Yet I couldn't shake the bitterness of those whispers, or the way her silence felt less like indifference and more like quiet pain. Standing there, watching her rebuild her armor piece by piece, I realized that the divide between us wasn't just age, or power, or circumstance. It was the world itself, the eyes that followed us, the voices that judged us, the shadows that stretched between who we were and who we were allowed to be. And for the first time, I wondered if wanting her was enough to stand against all of it. The rain had returned, soft and steady against the tall windows, when I finally confronted her. Weeks of silence, of sidelong glances, of words swallowed before they reached my lips, everything had led to this moment. I couldn't keep carrying it. Not the whispers, not the doubts, not the questions that kept me awake at night. She was at her desk, reviewing yet another stack of files, her posture perfect as ever. But beneath the glow of the desk lamp, I could see the faint tension in her jaw, the quiet exhaustion in her eyes. She didn't look up when I entered, but I didn't wait for her permission to speak. "I need to know," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is any of this real? Or am I just some distraction to you?" That made her pause. Slowly, she lifted her head, and for the first time, I saw her falter. Her eyes searched mine, and something in them, something unguarded, made my chest tighten. "You think I'm using you?" she asked softly. The words carried no anger, only weariness. "I don't know what to think anymore," I admitted. "You hold all the power. You tell me what to do, how to act, where to stand, and I follow. But I need to know if this is just control, or if it's something more." The silence that followed was unbearable. She set her pen down, leaning back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly before she clasped them together in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid," she said. I blinked. Afraid of what? Her eyes dropped to the desk, then back to me, raw and exposed in a way I had never seen before. "Afraid of wanting you. Afraid of what it means to lose control after a lifetime of building walls. You don't understand, people expect me to be untouchable. To never bend. To never need. And with you," she trailed off, shaking her head. I stepped closer, my pulse racing. She had never looked so vulnerable, so breakable. The woman who commanded courtrooms, who silenced whispers with a glance, was trembling not because of her enemies, but because of me. Her hand lifted slightly, as though she meant to reach for me, but stopped midway, suspended in the air between us. Waiting. The rain tapped harder against the glass, the room quiet but for the sound of our breaths. For once, the choice wasn't hers to make, it was mine. And I realized then that she wasn't the only one afraid. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The rain outside softened to a gentle patter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Her hand still hovered between us, trembling, caught in hesitation. And I knew that if I stepped back, she would withdraw, armor rebuilt, and this fragile truth would vanish forever. So I closed the distance. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for her hand, wrapping it firmly in mine. Her fingers tightened instinctively, as if she had been waiting for me to make that choice. She exhaled then, a sound that was almost a sigh, almost a surrender. The sharp lines of her face softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to simply be. No courtroom, no masks, no whispers to silence. Just her, and me. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her eyes searching mine. "You don't have to know," I said quietly. "You just have to let me be here." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not confident, not calculated, just honest. She stood then, and for the first time, she didn't tower above me with authority, but leaned into me with something else entirely. Something gentler. When her head rested against my shoulder, I felt her breathing slow, steadying against the rhythm of my chest. My arms moved almost on their own, circling around her waist, holding her as though anchoring her in place. The woman who had always carried the world alone finally allowed herself to be held. The silence was no longer heavy. It was warm. Safe. I thought of all the whispers in the courthouse, of the judgments, the doubts, the cruel laughter. None of it mattered here. Not when she was leaning into me as though I was the one thing she could trust. Not when I realized that what we had was not about control, or power, or obedience, it was about choice. She lifted her head slightly, meeting my gaze once more. There was no storm left in her eyes now, only quiet certainty. "You're not in trouble anymore," she murmured. I smiled faintly. "Because I obeyed you?" She shook her head. "Because you stayed." The rain faded into silence, and for the first time since I met her, I felt the tension between us settle, not as a fire waiting to ignite, but as a steady flame we could both keep alive. That night, in her office, everything changed. Not with grand declarations, not with passion burning out of control. But with something stronger, two people, divided by years and judgment, choosing each other anyway. And for me, that choice felt like the only truth that mattered.